Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 4, the characteristics of Rishabdev, text number 8. So this is prose. So, sorry? On the board it's text 9. The number says 8. Okay. Tell the person who writes up the shloka not to bother tomorrow. Just change the top and the bottom. Anyway, I'll read the verse and then we'll do the word for word. Ataha Bhagavan Rishabdevaha Svavarasham Kamachitram Anumanyamanaha Pradarashita Gurukulu Vaso Labdhavarayar Gurubhir Anugyato Grihamedinam Dharman Anushikshamano Jayantyam Indra Datayam Ubhaya Lakshanam Karma Samam Nayam Natam Abhayunjan Atmanjanam Atmasammananam Satam Janayam Asa. Word for word. Ata, thereupon, after the departure of his father. Ha, indeed. Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Rishabdevaha, Rishabdeva. Sva, his own. Varasham, kingdom. Karamakchetram, the field of activities. Anumanyamanaha, accepting as. Pradashita, shown as an example. Gurukula Vasaha, lived at the Gurukul. Labdha, having achieved. Varai, gifts. Gurubhi, by the spiritual masters. Anugyataha, being ordered. Grihamedhinam, of the householders. Dharman, duties. Anusikshamanaha, teaching by example. Jayantyam, in his wife. Jayanti. Indradatayam, offered by Lord Indra. Ubhaya Lakshanam, of both types. Karma, activities. Samam Nayam Natam, mentioned in the scriptures. Abhiyunjan, performing. Atmajanam, sons. Atmasamananam, exactly like himself. Shatam, 100. Janayam Masa, begot. After Nabi Maharaj departed for Badrik Ashram, the Supreme Lord Rishabdev understood that his kingdom was his field of activities. He therefore showed himself as an example and taught the duties of a householder by first accepting brahmacharya under the direction of spiritual masters. He also went to live at the spiritual master's place, Gurukula. After his education was finished, he gave gifts, Guru Dakshina, to his spiritual masters and then accepted the life of a householder. He took a wife named Jayanti and begot 100 sons who were as powerful and qualified as he himself. His wife Jayanti had been offered to him by Indra, the king of heaven. Rishabdev and Jayanti performed householder life in an exemplary way, carrying out ritualistic activities ordained by the Shruti and Smriti Shastra. Purport. Being an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Rishabdeva had nothing to do with material affairs. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Paritranaya Sadhunam Vinashaya Chatushkritam. The purpose of an incarnation is to liberate his devotees and to stop the demoniac activities of non-devotees. These are the two functions of the Supreme Lord when he incarnates. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that in order to preach, one must live a practical life and show people how to do things. Apani achari bhakti shikhayamu sabare. One cannot teach others unless he behaves the same way himself. Rishabdev was an ideal king, and he took his education in the Gurukula, although he was already educated because the Supreme Lord is omniscient. Although Rishabdev had nothing to learn from Gurukula, he went there just to teach the people in general how to take an education from the right source, from Vedic teachers. He then entered householder life and lived according to the principles of Vedic knowledge, Shruti and Smriti. In his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1-2-10, Srila Rupa Goswami, quoting the Skanda Purana, states, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidhim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Utpattayeva Kalpate. Human society must follow the instructions received from Shruti and Smriti, Vedic literature. Practically applied in life, this is worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead according to the Pancharatrika Vidhi. Every human being must advance his spiritual life and at the end return home back to Godhead. Maharaj Rishabdeva strictly followed all these principles. He remained an ideal grihasta and taught his sons how to become perfect in spiritual life. These are some examples of how he ruled the earth and completed his mission as an incarnation. Om Gyanatimmirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam rupakadamayam tadati svapadantikam mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate kirim yat kripa tamaham bande swikurum dinatarinam. So, first statement of the purport, Prabhupada says, being an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Rishabdev had nothing to do with material affairs. So then the question might be asked, why is he going to school? Why is he getting married? You know, why do we go to school? Usually to earn a livelihood, make some money for sense gratification. Certainly the Grihastha ashram is an ashram for sensual gratification. So if the Lord has nothing to do with material affairs, then why is he engaging in these activities? And Prabhupada then clarifies this point. He quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, Paritranaya sadhunam, in order to protect the devotees. Vinashaya chatuskritam, and in order to destroy the duskrita, or the duskrita means the bad doers, but we translate that as the demons, the baddies, the bad guys. So in order to protect the good and to destroy the evil, the Lord has a mission. Prabhupada mentions this in the bottom of the purport. These are some examples of how he ruled the earth and completed his mission as an incarnation. And that mission is to liberate his devotees and to stop the demonic activities of non-devotees. These are the two functions of the Supreme Lord when he incarnates. So the Lord has a mission. He may appear in the material world and it looks as if he's behaving like one of us, but his purpose or mission is not for material sense gratification, but rather he descends for spiritual purposes. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the sun, where we may be standing on the ground and looking into the sky, and all we see is clouds. But if we were to rise up to the position of the sun, from the sun's point of view, we could see everything from a very clear perspective. The cities, the towns, the mountains, the fields, the countries, everything is easily seen and understood in perspective. But the living entity, who is of the same quality as the sun, we're eternal like the Lord. And we have living force like the Lord, but we have a tendency to fall down. And so when we fall under the cloud of material existence, then our perspective or our observation of things becomes covered over. Our spiritual identity is lost. Jai Shri Shri Gaunitai, Jai Krishna Balaram, Jai Shri Shri Radha Shyam Sundara. Just as the sun, we may fall underneath the cloud of ignorance that's created by the material existence, but the sun never falls under the clouds. It always remains in that superior position. So similarly also, Krishna remains in his superior position always and never falls under the influence of the material energy. Yet, sometimes he chooses to enter into the material world, and so it looks as if he's under the influence of material energy, accepts a form just like us, or even accepts forms of an animal or other incarnations. So it appears as if he's assuming a material form, but actually those forms of the Lord are not material, but they're endowed, as always, with spiritual potency. It is like described in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, when Putana came to poison Krishna. It's described that he appears like embers covered by ash, right? So if you've seen a fire that's died down and is no longer burning, the embers are covered by ash. But if you put your foot in the fire and step on the ember, what happens? It burns like anything. So Krishna appeared just as a little baby, but as embers covered by ash, he still had that potency. Even though he just appears as a little baby, innocent little baby, or couldn't hurt anybody, still he has that potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that was manifest when Putana offered her breast, and Krishna then sucked the life air out of Putana. So, why does Krishna come into the material world? We know the material world is a place of suffering. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha dosha anudarshanam, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. The material world is a place of birth, death, old age and disease. It's a place of suffering. So why would the Lord want to come into such a... He's transcendental, superior to the material energy. Why come into the material world at all? A place of suffering. So an example can be given. In our temple, we have a pond. And in the pond, there's a fountain. And in the pond also, there are fish. And it's a very attractive place for the children. Children are always standing around the pond, looking in and looking at the fish. And it's got a railing around it, but the parents are always keeping an eye on their children, because there's always the danger of them falling into the pond. And even it's happened, I've seen it. One child fell in, the parent had to hop into the pond to grab his child and pull him out. Right? So, ordinarily we don't go playing in the pond. But we keep an eye on our children to make sure they don't drown in the pond. So similarly also, Krishna keeps his eye on everyone. Suridam Sarvabhutanam, he's the well-wishing friend of everybody. So he's keeping an eye on everyone, even those who fall into the material world. And in order to save them, just as the parent saves the child from danger, so similarly also Krishna comes into the place of suffering, comes into the material world to extract us out. to pull us out of the material creation. And so it's for this purpose that Rishabh has accepted these responsibilities. Oh, another somewhat, we might say, material activity is being the king, being the manager of his kingdom. That's accepting a somewhat material responsibility. But of course, when one has the proper spiritual perspective on action and on the realm here, it's described, what is it? It's described as the Karma Chetram, his place of activities, right? If we see our Karma Chetram as the place of activities, or that place where we perform our service, it's called the Prabhu Datta Desh. Each devotee should be given their place of service. And then where they perform their service, that's not considered to be a material location, but because that service and that activity is performed for the pleasure of Krishna, then even if it's, or especially if it's managing a temple or overseeing the activities of a Krishna conscious community, then those or in this case overseeing the order of the state, then those activities, when performed for the pleasure of the Lord and under the auspices of the spiritual teachers, following the principles of the Vedas here recommended, the Shruti and the Smriti, then those activities are not material, those activities are purely spiritual, when the purpose is for pleasing Krishna. This is the measure of spiritual advancement, is when our activities are wholly and solely focused on Krishna's pleasure. So in order to liberate the devotees and stop the demonic activities of the non-devotees, Maharaj Rishabh appeared to set an example. So Prabhupada says here, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that in order to preach, one must live a practical life and show people how to do things. Apani achari bhakti shikayamu shabare. This is from the Adilila I think it's chapter 3. Or is it verse 3 of the first chapter? One cannot teach others unless he behaves the same way himself. So Prabhupada gives the examples of Lord Chaitanya. And the same can be applied to Rishabh. Just because we see Rishabh engaging in activities like going to school or accepting the role of the king or taking on the role of a householder, we shouldn't think that he's become a materialistic person. With Lord Chaitanya, he says, Lord Chaitanya appeared as a devotee. As a devotee, he appeared to teach the process of devotional service. And his means of teaching wasn't just by giving instructions. Of course, it was by giving instruction, but not only by giving instruction, by setting an example. You know, Prabhupada says, if you want to teach people don't smoke cigarettes, then you yourself have to not smoke, right? You can't teach people to not smoke cigarettes if you're smoking cigarettes yourself. So, and Prabhupada also says, you know, just because the teacher in order to help a student who's not grasping the concepts well, he takes the chalk and he starts writing on the board. Here's how you do it: A, B, C. That doesn't mean that the teacher's learning the ABCs, but rather he's teaching by example. So just because Lord Chaitanya appeared as a teacher of devotional service didn't mean, or as a practitioner himself, and an example here of Rishabdev and also of Lord Chaitanya and also of Krishna himself, he as an idol king took his education in the Gurukul. Yet he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's omniscient. What does omniscient mean? All-knowing. He knows everything. So why does he need to go to the Gurukul? He doesn't need to go to the Gurukul. He goes to the Gurukul in order to set an example for us, that we should live our lives according to spiritual principles. We need to study the Shastra. Here, Prabhupada quotes from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidhim Vina, that activities, devotional service that is performed without consideration of the Shruti, the Smriti, the Puranas and the Pancharatra is utpat, which means a disturbance. Utpatyaiva kalpate. So devotional service, or all of our activities, because all of our activities are meant to be for the pleasure of Krishna, and so therefore all of our activities should be devotional service, should be performed according to the principles that we learn from the Shastra. But the Shastra is sometimes confusing. You find some statements appear to be contradictory, and so therefore in order to understand how to apply the principles of the Shastra, we have to learn first of all the principles themselves, and then the application according to Kala Desha Patra, time, place and person, or time, place and circumstance, from the Acharya. The Acharya is or from the teacher. And so therefore, here Rishabdev took his education in the Gurukul, and it's mentioned here actually that it wasn't just from one guru, but from gurus, plural, gurubhi, by the spiritual masters, which is generally the case. Vande Gurun, in the beginning of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj offers his respects to his spiritual masters. Because very often we're trained not just by one person, but by many people. And many people at different levels at different stages of spiritual life. Yet they help us, they assist us in our devotional service, and so therefore we owe a debt of gratitude to those persons. I know one of the first devotees that preached to me was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, but he wasn't practicing Krishna consciousness at all. I didn't have much understanding about the Hare Krishna movement, although I was attracted to the chanting of Hare Krishna. But this devotee came to the house that I was living in, and he actually came there to buy some heroin from one of my friends, actually, so definitely not a devotee in good standing. But and that doesn't say too much about the company that I was keeping either. But he told me the story about Valmiki Muni and how he became a a rishi, a sage, after getting the association of Narada Muni, and how Narada Muni asked him to chant the name of Ram, and he said, "I can't do that, I'm too fallen." And so Narada Muni said, "Well, just chant the name of death, Mara Mara." But of course, if you chant Mara Mara Mara, it becomes Rama Rama Rama. So in that way, he tricked him. Right? And that devotee, in telling me that story, increased my faith in the practice of Krishna consciousness, because at that stage I knew the Maha Mantra, but I wasn't regularly chanting, and it increased my understanding and faith in the whole Krishna conscious philosophy. So we are aided and guided by many people in varying circumstances, and each one of those persons who helps us make progress on the path of Krishna consciousness should be respected. And so therefore, in offering our respects and in offering our obeisances, we honour the predecessor acharyas, and we honour our Siksha gurus. So we see that example being demonstrated here by Lord Rishabhdev. We see that example being demonstrated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We see that example demonstrated by Krishna. They don't need to go to school. You know, Krishna was given the Brahman thread by Gargamuni, and then he went to the Gurukul of Sandipani Muni in Ujjain. I can't remember the name of it, but it was in Ujjain, where Krishna and Balaram went to the Gurukul. And in 64 days, they learned all of the arts and sciences. So obviously, you know, they didn't need to go to school, but in order to demonstrate the principle, to teach by example, as Prabhupada says, one cannot teach others unless he behaves the same way himself. So, you know, we see Krishna performs extraordinary activities. He lifts Govardhan Hill, for example. He engages in a rasa dance with the gopis. You know, these activities are extraordinary, and they're to illustrate how Krishna is the supreme. Well, they're performed to please his devotees, paritranaya sadhunam. They're performed for the pleasure of his devotees, but they also display the extraordinary opulence and power of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so those activities are not to be imitated. You know, Prabhupada says those who want to imitate Krishna's pastimes with the gopis forget his prowess in lifting Govardhan Hill with his, you know, the little finger of his left hand. So generally speaking, we should follow we should follow the instructions of great authorities, not try to imitate their wonderful activities. So in this way, Krishna or Lord Rishabhdev are teaching us one should seek education from spiritual authorities. And then when one is properly trained, then one should offer dakshina. Right? I couldn't find the reference yesterday, but I remember reading recently Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explained that this is an imperative. The process of receiving spiritual knowledge is not complete until one reciprocates and offers the dakshina to the spiritual master. And so the disciple is duty bound to honour the spiritual masters by giving them dakshina. So Rishabhdev demonstrates this. He then entered into householder life, and says here, lived according to the principles of Vedic knowledge. So this is these principles are principles that we should practice, that we should demonstrate in our own lives, following in the example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, following in the example of Rishabdev, following the example of Krishna. Most persons will enter into into householder life, and so Maharaj Rishabdev accepted the responsibilities and the duties after he'd performed his training in the Gurukul. Then he entered into householder life and performed the householder life according to religious principles. It's mentioned here, Griha Medinam Dharman, the duties of the householders. It's interesting to note that he was given his wife by Indra, the king of heaven. So we can assume that relations between Lord Indra and Rishabdev were what shall we say, friendly at this point, because previously it mentions that Indra withdrew rains, right? So we can assume perhaps Indra, being somewhat true to form, became envious of the characteristics of Maharaj Rishabdev, and so he withdrew the rain. But Rishabdev, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, could provide the rain anyway, without Indra's help. And so I guess it looks here like they managed to patch things up, and Indra offered him his wife Jayanti, and then Maharaj Rishabdev remained an ideal grihastha and taught his sons how to become perfect in spiritual life. And verses coming up describe how Maharaj Rishabdev had 100 sons, and how qualified those sons were. 9 of them became the Nava-yogendras, and their discussion with the Nava-yogendras is described in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam. So very elevated, very, very elevated personalities. 9 elderly sons who became Kshatriyas, 9 who became great yogis, others became fully qualified Brahmanas. So by his example, Maharaj Rishabdev demonstrated how, ordinarily anybody who has 100 sons would be considered to be a great big sense gratifier, right? I remember in the papers in Australia, there was a story a few years ago of a man who had 6 wives and 54 children, and it was a big woo, and they were claiming social security benefits from all of the children, so they were living on the dole. So anyway, but Maharaj Rishabh, not at all like that. He demonstrated by example, by following the dharma of the griha, that it's perfectly fine to have children. Even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said he would be willing to have thousands of children if he could make them all devotees. And that's demonstrated by Rishabhdev. He was able to make all of his children as qualified as himself. So they're all very elevated personalities. So this is an example for those of us in the householder life, in the Krishna consciousness movement. You know, we're here to preach, and Rishabhdev really is showing by example how we should preach. We should be thoroughly attached and adherent to this principle of receiving our education and guidance from the Vedic scriptures and from the teachers or those who are adept at applying the principles of the Vedas in practical daily life, so that we can set an example for others. You know, Prabhupada describes how our process is running on two tracks. There's the Pancharatra Vidhi and the Bhagavat Vidhi. The Pancharatra Vidhi, as Prabhupada mentions here, the Pancharatrika Vidhi is basically the process of worshipping the deity. The process of cleanliness, of puja, of regulation. So that's one track, just like a railway engine or a train needs two tracks to run properly. Take away one track and over it goes. So similarly also the process of devotional service requires the Pancharatrika Vidhi, but then also the Bhagavat Vidhi. The Bhagavat Vidhi is our chanting, is our study of the Shastra, is our preaching, is our festivals. This is the Bhagavat Vidhi, and the two need to be running parallel. And if they're balanced, then our spiritual progress is assured, it's guaranteed. And we learn that process by understanding the principles and then applying them according to the order or the instruction of the spiritual masters or the spiritual master. And in that way then we can teach everybody how to order life in such a way so that not that we completely give up all material affairs, but rather we balance our lives so that we have our spiritual life intact, and we're then also able to pursue our material or so-called material responsibilities. Actually, they're not material responsibilities when they're properly balanced with a spiritual understanding of the purpose of life. Krishna's purpose is explained here, paritranaya sadhunam, to free the devotees, and that's our mission also. That's Krishna's mission, Rishabhdev's mission, that's Lord Chaitanya's mission. And we're following in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami, Lord Chaitanya's most intimate disciple, we could say, Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam. He understood the mind of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Prabhupada explains we're Rupanugas. So we follow the instructions